So I've organized this presentation, and basically the premise of what I'm going to be covering relates to an area of particular astrological interest. And there's many theories that many different astrologers from many different spheres have been commenting on for quite a while now. But particularly for 2026, this is considered a very important year astrologically. And one of the main reasons for that is for the outer planet Uranus returning to Gemini for the first time in over 80 years, or about that. And I want to have my own take on this, and granted, I'm no seasoned astrologer. I will be covering my astrological background, or for what constitutes my astrological background in this presentation. But a thought occurred to me very recently about when contrasting all of the outer planets together, and we saw earlier this year, Neptune was a subject of interest. Also last year, Pluto moved into into Aquarius, and that's a very big thing. But we're still waiting on Uranus, and on April 26th, in some parts of the northern hemisphere anyway, here in Australia, it will be April 25th, Uranus is returning to Gemini. And when looking at some of the characteristics that differentiate Neptune in Aries, and Pluto in Aquarius, and Uranus in Gemini, a very interesting picture starts to be painted, for me at least anyway. And like I'm saying, I'm not really coming at this as much as a practical astrologer as I am just a person who, like all people, has a unique vision of the world, and this is just my take. So, in conjunction with who I consider a very important historical figure, and we're going to be talking about that as well. We're going to be talking about one academic perspective on this, and granted, there are very limited academic perspectives on this, for why this person, their philosophy, their ideology, why I think, and I will be getting into my theory by the end of this, that a focal point for this person's worldview being anti-technology, uh, wilderness, really anti-civilization in a sense, maybe not as much as some other writers and thinkers, but that's definitely a facet of what motivated the core premise of his anti-technology views. So I think that's it for just what I feel was a pretty poorly explained basic introduction, but as I go along, hopefully this picture will start to be painted more clearly. So just a basic outline of what I will be discussing. I will give a general introduction, I will give a background into this person and the planets, and we'll go into some nativity. We will go through some transits, and also as I'm going along, I will slowly start to incorporate little pieces of just a theory that I have. I'm not saying it is gonna happen. I'm not out here making predictions. I'm not qualified to do that. No one really is. I study a science degree at university, so I'm not out here trying to misrepresent the people or nothing. I'm not trying to misrepresent astrologers either. This is just my own thing, and I thought it was interesting, and I think that maybe some other astrologers might find it interesting. Can't so much speak for other people. Maybe followers of this person's work and people who find this person interesting on either a personal or ideological level. Um, so yeah, I think it's important that I mention actually that with studying a science degree and having over 7 years now interest in astrology, I don't think this is necessarily a contradiction. I don't think it's oxymoronic. Um, in some whimsical ways, I think they kind of reinforce each other. Um, but that's definitely open to criticism and interpretation, absolutely. So, just a basic outline of my astrological journey. So in 2019, I was formally introduced to the concept of a natal chart. I knew what star signs were before then, but I did not know of a sun sign, of an ascendant. I didn't know about anything. I didn't even know that this was really a practical thing. I didn't know that there were historical components to it. And so 2019, which is when I was in my seventh house profection, uh, I was introduced to the first taste I ever got of astrology. And this is what ultimately paved the way for my deeper interests that would last until the present day. I started to move through syncretist circles, cultural syncretist circles in 2022. Um, that was very interesting because it introduced me to philosophical astrology, which I now know is very different from practical astrology, but they definitely work in tandem. And I also, during that time, I developed an interest in astrotheological philosophy, and I also developed an interest in Kabbalistic astrology. My practical applications didn't begin, and the philosophy that I had learnt wasn't put into any practical use until late 2024, and that's when I was introduced to the concept of non-quadrant and quadrant house systems. I had no idea what that was. In cultural syncretism, that's not a thing that's spoken about in cultural syncretism because, again, it's really impractical and it is like a very broad generalization of exactly what the name says, syncretism, which is a syncing of theology, philosophy, some whimsical science shit, and yeah, it's pretty funky. And then I just added this here because I will be touching on some sociological perspectives in this presentation. But during 2025, I participated in and completed an undergraduate certificate, and beginning of this year, I began my undergraduate's degree. Um, I major in sociology, so that's why that's important. That's why that's there. So, yes, this is the guy that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about Ted Kaczynski's Nativity. Crazy, I know. Yes, maybe not in the clinical sense, up for interpretation as well, perhaps. but I haven't really seen anyone do this, which I think is interesting. You know, it's some astrologers, they gotta get on this, you know. This is just there. And what are they doing? I mean, well, they actually are doing the most, you know. Um, so I'm gonna have to assume that I'm not gonna discuss this person's crimes. I'm not gonna discuss their personal life. Um, I'm gonna have to assume that you already have a little bit of knowledge about that, and if you don't know about it, then look it up. And there are so many videos out there who these people they could explain it better than me. Um, but the main point is that he he to put it lightly, he was a bit of a misanthrope. He didn't really like people. He didn't really like the world. He didn't like the mechanisms of the world. He didn't like, I guess, feeling as though he was on the receiving end of harassment from the world. Um, but one of the things that people always mention when they talk about him is that he was very clever. He was a very high intelligence, and I'm not saying that to try and, you know, like justify anything or nothing. It's just a thing that people say, and I guess it is important to what I'm talking about because he more so than just some hermit and um, disgruntled ex-academic was a philosopher. And again, this is something that either isn't really spoken about at all, or if it is, it's spoken about by people who can explain it way better than me. So my main point really here is to focus on his nativity and what's going on with Uranus there, what's going on with his outer planets, and what's going on for his Uranus return, which is coming up on 25th/26th of April, and why I think that that's going to be important, and how I think that that's ultimately going to either um, introduce the world to either the early stages of what will eventually become the anti-technological revolution, or what we'll see a prominent rise and a very public rise of people who want to follow up with his vision. I don't necessarily think it will be in the same violent ways, and I will get into that a little bit as well. So this is a Skyrim reference. Letter from a friend. If you know, you know. But I just felt it was important that I mention that I wrote to Ted. I started writing to him in March 2020 during the early days of COVID. I think it was his 79th, no, 78th birthday. I sent him a card, a birthday card, and I drew a picture of his untimed birth chart on it. Okay, so, and I thought it was funny. I was like, wow, this guy was like a maths fucking freak, and I'm drawing his fucking astrology. I thought it was hilarious, okay? And then the last time I wrote to him, from memory, was sometime in early 2023. I don't know when, but it was obviously before he passed away. And I just felt that that was important to mention. So, for the most part, I just wanted to credit Associate Professor Sean Fleming from the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom. He's an American Associate Professor of Social Science, and he's really the first. I just realized that says fist and not first. Oh my God, guys. Don't clock me on that, okay? But really the first academic to give an accredited analysis of his anti-technological philosophy and really go into it, not even just so much from a philosophical point of view, because plenty of other people have done that, notably I think Chad Haag, but Sean Fleming's perspective is more so looking at eco-terrorism and trying to, I think, like, and I'm not that familiar with his work, but I think really just trying to redefine through the sociological imagination, perhaps, how ecoterrorism has been mischaracterized. And I also have my own take on this as well from my own sociological information that I've learnt at university. Um, and something that's really interesting that Sean Fleming, he mentioned this in one of the podcasts that Hermetics did with him. He said that Kaczynski's manifesto is one of the most famous in the past century, and yet there is limited information and analysis of Kaczynski's influence. And just from a personal point of view, I felt that that was really interesting because of how Kaczynski's work influenced me, and I guess how I also kind of see myself. And I say this as I'm like filming this on technology, but see myself as eventually, hopefully, becoming a part of what I hope will become an anti-technological revolution. And I don't know if this is going to be something so science fiction-y that it's going to look like one of the Dune books or like some Mad Max something. But you know, time will tell, and according to astrologers, the stars will tell too, so that's fun. Um, and another thing that Fleming argues is that critics put too much emphasis on the crimes of Kaczynski and that they don't actually analyze his arguments. And, you know, on one end, I can understand why that is. Like, generally speaking, most people are gonna hear, well, you know, he was this guy and he was living out in the woods and he was sending packages to people and on planes and shit, and like 3 people died, and most people are gonna go, well, yeah, fuck this guy. So, you know, I totally get that. That's completely understandable. We're not here to make a psychological argument. We're not here to talk about morality. We're astrologers, okay? So this is kind of what I was just saying, but like, obviously, I'm not justifying like sending packages that have fucking like explosives in them, like that. Obviously, I'm not, like, I'm literally not qualified to, like, what metric do you know what I like? Who the fuck am I to say if that's like a whatever, you know? But I'm not I'm not going to justify killing people. Like, what? Obviously not. So, yeah. Um, and I also have this note here that, like, criticism for the anticipation of violence or violent people that his writings and philosophy have influenced. So, most people, like, kind of touching on what Fleming said, part of the reason why there is this reluctance to look any deeper into what he was saying, his point of view, is because, again, people see it as this morally reprehensible thing that he was involved in. So, what's the point in analyzing or looking any deeper into what he was saying? And that a lot of people would be concerned that it would replicate violence. And I don't know if there have been any Unabomber copycats or whatever. They probably have. Um, but I'm not going to associate with those people anyway, and like this video isn't for those people. Like, yeah, like I don't even really feel like I need to give that disclaimer, but just in case. Violent influence is the violent influence. This again is kind of touching on my own personal experience. The violent influence is more limited than the more positive and individually transforming effects of his work. Um, Through writing to him, I met some of my best friends in my life through what was called back then neo-Luddite circles. I don't really know if that's a thing now, But I met a lot of my closest and most trusted friends through there, and they're really good people. They're educated people. They're straighty 180 kind of people. Most of them don't drink alcohol. They don't do drugs. Some of them smoke cigarettes. But apparently that's okay or whatever. So yeah, like just touching on my own experience, that when I first discovered Kaczynski's books, I was still a teenager, and it inspired me to want to fight for a better future, for a better world. Not so much fight in the, I guess, traditional sense, but at least to put in effort. And instead of standing on a soapbox and complaining and whinging about, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, which a lot of people do, to actually take radical measures, to actually do something about this. But it was just a matter of, where do I go to do this? Like, where am I needed? Where are the people who are gonna assist me? Like, where is the tribe? That sort of thing. And I do think that with Uranus moving into Gemini, that's going to be another thing with the anti-tech revolution that's going to come about, is, like I said, either the early stages or a very public prominence in these circles, and that it kind of becoming a really big movement. So, touching on the influence of Kaczynski, with the growing number of concerns about genetic engineering and climate change, nanotechnologies, AI, nuclear weapons, automation, etc., that this has given rise to, and probably will continue to give more rise to, anti-tech sentiments and anti-technological ideas. And that Kaczynski himself has really become like the poster boy for this movement. And he provided, and this comes from Sean Fleming, he provided the most detailed blueprint for an anti-tech revolution. No one has really ever done this. And that brings me to my next point, that Kaczynski is easier to read than classical anti-tech writers like Mumford, who I love. If you haven't read any of Mumford's books, highly recommend it. Ellul, who Kaczynski was particularly inspired by, and Heidegger, who was another inspiration of Kaczynski's as well. Probably a bit more of a controversial person than Mumford or Ellul. But particularly amongst the youth, I think part of the reason why they are so attracted to Kaczynski's appeal in pop culture is because he did produce material that it's very easy to read. And his sentences aren't congested. He stays away from using too much descriptive language. He's very concise in his message, and I think that is indicative of how determined he was, for better or for worse, to eradicate the industrial extensions of technological convenience. And I also said here that mostly young people are interested in him and inspired by him. And again, speaking from my own experience, I think that part of the reason why this is because young people have been subjected in their early development to the detrimental impacts of technology. Like I remember, this is 10 years ago now, over 10 years ago now, when I was in earlier in high school, social media having negative impacts, particularly on young girls, became this really big conversation. And there wasn't as much information about it back then than what there is now. But now I think it's, I want to say, kind of clear. I don't know if that would be the right word to use scientific from a scientific point of view, but it's pretty clear that it's resulted in poor reflections of its use slash misuse, and that really it probably is misused more than it is used. And I don't have the formal language to be able to explain really even like what machine learning systems are, what automated decision making systems are. I'm not an engineer. I'm not I'm just a girl, you know. I'm just here and I'm just doing astrology. And Fleming said in his own words, he calls this the Kaczynskian decade of anti-tech. And again, poster boy, total fucking poster boy of what will probably become a really big and popular movement. And I think right now, um, people mostly are, they're more directed towards wanting to live off the grid and grow their own food, and they're pharmacologically illiterate and they're afraid of vaccines, and they think that Robert Kennedy Jr. is some like messianic figure or something, and that food's trying to kill them or whatever. Again, I'm not qualified to say if that's true or not true, but what I am saying is, um I don't even think that those people really know what they want. Okay? And I think that's important because I don't think it's going to be until kind of this extreme version of technology taking over that what people like Heidegger and Mumford and Ellul and Kaczynski, this vision that they all had for the future of us becoming one with the machine, and that it's like more omnipresent than just us using it, that we probably physically will become one with it. It's not until that starts happening when these people who are kind of on the fringe, and uh, I don't really think they know what they want, maybe they do, that they'll start to go, maybe me worrying about aluminum in FDA approved foods isn't the right way to go about this. Maybe I should actually do something practical instead of engaging in parapolitical discussions, perhaps. So, philosopher or killer or both? Again, I am so unqualified to. I basically shouldn't even be fucking talking about this. But again, we're astrologers. This is what we do. We're so pseudoscience-y right now. So the sensations surrounding his image are primarily based on his character rather than his philosophy, for better or for worse. In saying that, his ideas have been met with positive attitudes. And again, particularly amongst the youth, I think that that's very true. And there are exceptions, obviously, like I know they got some history, right? But John Zerzan, they used to be close. That has some beef, okay? That has, yep, that happened. But it's a cool story. And John Zerzan is just so cool. I mean, come on. Like, he was an old guy who grew up in San Francisco in the 60s, and that's just every Gen Z dream, right? So, with the first point I made, with the sensations around his image being primarily based on his character, I actually don't think that's something he wanted. I don't think that Kaczynski wanted people to be interested in him as a person. I don't think that he wanted people to be interested in his childhood, to be interested in what his brother had to say, maybe for more obvious reasons. I think he wanted more than anything, and this is probably why he decided to plead guilty. And he said himself that he was forced to. because his ideas were more important to him, and that he wanted his ideas to be more important to the world than him as a person. And I mean, yeah, maybe it's just one of those things, separate the art from the artist, maybe. Again, I'm not a lawyer, okay? I'm not a judge, I'm not a jury. I'm not Jesus Christ. I'm not out here trying to say what is right, what is good, what is bad, what is evil or whatever. Um and with him trying to reach a wider audience, because he was a loner and he kind of did that to himself. Prior to him threatening the Washington Post and the New York Times, he wrote to this eco-radical publication that was connected to Earth First. It was called Live Wild or Die. And he identified himself quite famously as FC, or Freedom Club, and he pleaded for them to publish his manifesto. I don't actually know if they did. I don't think they did. But he was very eager to get his ideas out there and reach a wider audience. And I think kind of like me, he didn't really like he had these ideas and he kind of had a feeling that other people might be interested and that there were other people out there like him who wanted to see not see this thing that he saw as so bad and evil take over and destroy the thing that meant the most to him, which was his metaphor for nature, which he called wildness. And he had a feeling that these people were out there and that he actually did know that there were other people out there like him, hence why he wrote to an eco-radical publication. I don't know, maybe he didn't see that as effective enough or something, or I don't know, maybe it was violence for the sake of violence. I don't think it was. But again, this isn't a fucking moral argument. So now we live amongst part of what Manuel Castells, who is one of my favorite sociologists, a network society, wherein reaching wider audiences can be done by anyone at any time via the internet. Obviously, Kaczynski didn't really have that back then, and even if he did, I don't think he would have used it, even if he thought that it could be used as a tool. But just an interesting thing to think about, did Kaczynski consider that the revolutionaries he sought would in future reach each other primarily through the internet, in facilitating these ideas and sharing these mutual ideas? Maybe, but that's what happened for me. And again, like I said, I've been friends with these people for a long time. So, we're going on, I think almost 8 years now or something. So now getting on to the astrology. So Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune. How does this all fit into this? Does it even fit into this? I'm not here to talk about if it does or it doesn't. This is just my own personal position with this. So pro-tech versus anti-tech, as I said before, is likely to become one of the most major fault lines in the politics of the next century. And I think this is already being seen, particularly with artificial intelligence. People, there are some people who they like it. They want to incorporate it into education. They want to incorporate it into uh, law. They want to incorporate it into law enforcement, and for the most part, it already really has been. And I guess part of Kaczynski's point was that that was going to happen. That was inevitable, that people were going to see this as a means of convenience, and that it was going to penetrate various different areas of the corporeal, and that eventually this would become such a convenience that it would develop its own awareness, I guess, and kind of consume everything from the inside out. And I do think that that's part of the reason why this movement is likely to be the most popular movement coming up in the next century, and that Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune, being generational planets, or what some people call transgenerational planets, or the outer planets, they have to, from an astrological point of view, play a part in that because they are the generational planets. And this also ties into Kaczynski's own Nativity and his Uranus return that's coming up. And just something that's interesting to touch on this, Ray Kurzweil, who I think he calls himself a futurist, or I don't know if that's just what he's referred to, or that's the name he gave himself. But he mentions Kaczynski in his own books, and that he agrees with him that technology is an autonomous organizing system that is beyond human rational control, and that eventually it will, being built to learn through, I guess, and again, I lack the formal lack the formal education and the formal language necessary to be able to explain even what these systems are, but I'm pretty sure that they're based on like predicting things, or like certain outcomes based on like probability and previous things that it recognizes. So it's not always perfect, and it makes mistakes just like humans. But being different in the sense that the people, whoever they are, the institutions, whatever they are, who develop these systems, they don't even really understand the extent to which these things can operate at all. They might, on like a more micro level, have an understanding about the components of the machines and how to build them and the materials that are needed to build them. But in terms of it operating, I want to say, with its own kind of, with its own self-awareness, maybe, how it's gonna look, and I don't really think anyone knows that, and that all people can really do is speculate. So ecoterrorism versus ecocide. Again, I'm not here to make judgments. But I do want to mention in particular ecocide. And this in sociology is a term that describes like the unlawful destruction of the earth. And most nations in the West, at least, they don't recognize this as being a criminal offense, not for their own not for their own part in it anyway. I don't know on like the civilian level. I don't think it is in Australia anyway. But touching on Sean Fleming's writing about trying to redefine, I guess, for lack of better wording, ecoterrorism in an age where governments, the Australian government being an example, spend more money on destroying the environment than they do on trying to maintain it. Can ecoterrorism only be applied to in like this crime and punishment sense? Can it only be applied in terms of like holding people who aren't a part of these operations accountable, or can it hold the people involved in those policies accountable as well? And this is kind of the background of what Ecocide is from a sociological point of view. So this is touching on crime and punishment and something that was very important to Weber, which was bureaucracy. And he basically had this very strong stance on, he wrote it in German though, not in English, so I don't know, this probably isn't an exact translation, but the monopoly on the legitimate use of force and violence being a defining characteristic of the modern state. So that organized entities authorized to use physical force, which is It has a formal name, which is state action. It distinguishes itself from violence by individuals or groups on the civilian level, which is deemed illegitimate or criminal. So there's, kind of some inconsistent thing going on there, I guess, and it's just something that's interesting to think about. And then again, in Crime and Punishment, which is kind of not interchangeable, but relies on bureaucracy and what that is from a sociological perspective, and relies on the modern state, and really relies on big data, and that has to do with automated decision making, which is this really big scary thing. If you want to know more about that, look at Planeteer. I think that's what it's called. The Peter Thiel guy, yeah, he's. I mean, I don't know if Kaczynski knew of him. He probably didn't. But if he was here to see what Peter Thiel and his colleagues are doing, he would definitely see it as reinforcing his fears about all this stuff. And then I just also have some notes here about, in Australian society, what goes on with Ecocide and how ecoterrorism, is it only applied to these individuals or these groups, or should it be applied? Should governments be held accountable for the destruction of the environment? So the Australian fossil fuel procedures. So this is obviously actively using taxpayer money to degrade the environment, and it's not treated as a criminal matter. Ecocide. Australia spends $8.3 billion each year to protect and repair environmental damage. In contrast, $26.3 billion is spent by the Australian federal government annually on biodiversity and harmful subsidies, which is basically incentives designed for economic growth that cause environmental damage. And the Australian fossil fuel subsidies is $16.3 billion from 2025 until thus far into 26. So Australia spends more money on harming nature than looking after it. I don't know if the same could be said for anywhere else. Probably it could be. I would guess it's somewhat similar in the States. So Kaczynski's Nativity. Again, I don't know. Actually, I think I said it, but I'm not a seasoned astrologer, and I'm not here to decode his chart. This is an untimed chart, and I am using whole sign for any astrologers watching this. So David Kaczynski, if you're watching, reply to my email, shorty. Reply, because I was hitting your line asking you for Ted's birth time, because I want to be one of the first astrologers to get on that. So you better email me back, all right? Linda, if you're watching this and you see your husband's emails, and you see some random girl's email in there talking about astrology, that's me, girl. Reply. I gotta know this time, okay? So yes, he has a 5-planet Gemini stellium. We're not here to talk about that. Yes, he has a debilitated Venus, Jupiter, and Mars. We're not here to talk about that. Yes, he has a domiciled Mercury. We're not here to talk about that. I'm not Claudius Ptolemy. Okay, I'm not out here trying to do the Egyptian stuff, the Ptolemaic stuff. But what we are going to talk about is this very interesting cluster right here that's happening within a degree between his Uranus, his Sun, and his Saturn. And this is the first thing that stood out to me. The second thing that stood out to me was his Venus. But again, untimed chart, so really don't want to go too deep into it. So this is all according to Astroseek. These are the significations of his Sun, Saturn, and Uranus aspects and this cluster. So the applying aspect between his Sun and Saturn lends seriousness, self-discipline, and quiet strength to challenges that help build lasting resilience. Growth comes through steady effort and self-awareness. And again, like, I'm not here to say how accurate or inaccurate this is, but this is according to his nativity. And the reason why I'm mentioning this as well is because when I mention the transit chart, which I timed for the day and kind of to the hour, I think, that Uranus will move into Gemini, which is his Uranus return. And that's why I think a lot of this stuff is important in terms of, is Uranus moving into Gemini corresponding to the rest of the outer planets and all the kind of, I guess, not so much chaos, but maybe significant things that they have brought about or that astrologers are speculating they're going to bring about. How is it going to play into that? And could it look like an anti-tech revolution? Well, certainly with Pluto going on through Aquarius, maybe. That's my theory anyway. But all of this stuff comes from his nativity, and I think that in the instance that there is some truth to perhaps, maybe, an anti-tech revolution becoming the next big thing, the next big revolution, that all of this stuff, and I've picked out these little pieces in particular because in the instance that that does happen, these things, they're kind of indicative of that. And being, as Sean Fleming said, the most prominent anti-tech writer of the last century, if there is anything going on with his Uranus return and that his vision will finally come into fruition and that his people will stand up and really try to crush Peter Thiel and Ray Kurzweil, not physically, but, you know, try to, I guess, rebuttal what they see as innovation and, you know, ingeniousness, which it might be considered that. I don't know. I'm just an astrologer, okay? And then Sun Uranus separating, strong sense of individuality, powerful urge to live life on one's own terms, walk a path less traveled, drawn to the unconventional, the innovative and the visionary, quick to challenge outdated norms and question the status quo. Originality is inspiring, and his originality was very inspiring, for better or for worse, as I said. A calling to lead by example, maybe not so much, you know. Deep need for freedom and authenticity makes it difficult to conform to traditional roles. Challenges in learning to channel uniqueness in constructive ways that allow for collaboration and connection. Uranus-Saturn separating merges discipline and originality, finding innovative solutions while remaining grounded in practical reality. Holds democratic ideals, strong sense of responsibility. They become thoughtful reformers who know how to build lasting change. And then for the outer planet correspondence in his nativity, Uranus-Neptune trine separating. Intuitive and imaginative nature, desire to live a meaningful life. Impulsive needs support from other planetary factors to fully manifest. Subtle but transformative insights. Uranus-Pluto sextile applying. Strong sense that change is both necessary and possible. Deeply motivated to improve the world around them. Transformative insight, called to challenge norms. And then, so this transit chart I cast for the location, the birth location, and the time that I put in, I don't actually know if this is correct, but I just looked up for this time zone when Uranus will be entering Gemini, and it said from between 1 and 2 a.m. So I just put 1:30 a.m. and we can see that Uranus is at the very within the first degree of Gemini. So for Ted, in terms of a transit, this is a Uranus to Uranus conjunction. And this doesn't happen, this only happens like every 84 years, whereabouts, and obviously he's not alive to experience it, but could this apply to Freedom Club Reignited? Could this apply to what could possibly become the next big revolution, the anti-technological revolution? Could his anti-tech revolution happen with the outer planets in mind? Keeping in mind, Pluto, definitely, yeah, I think there's something there for sure. And a lot of astrologers have been saying how Pluto being in Aquarius is going to bring about like really big developments in hyper advanced technology. But with Uranus, could it also, and aren't they like they're gonna go like trine? They're gonna be in an exact trine at some point, maybe, I think. Um, so could Uranus counter that? Could Uranus have this more like counterintuitive approach to what Pluto wants, which is maybe you could argue is kind of aligned with what people like Peter Thiel or Elon Musk want. You could argue that. I'm not saying that that's what Pluto wants. So for when his Uranus is returned exact, and again this is untimed, but I played around with it a bit, and at some point on the 3rd of May, his Uranus will be in its return at the exact degree, pretty much. But it's untimed. So it's at any time during May 3rd. Uranus is the powerhouse of revolution. So Ted, having in his nativity a Uranus to Uranus conjunction in an exact degree, where the idea could meet the practice, with Uranus being the powerhouse of revolution, and with that Plutonian and Neptunian influence in mind as well. And I just had a little analogy here. So a flame without combustion is just a flame, and this is my very, very poorly displayed, I'm not out here trying to say that I'm a fucking physicist and that I know shit about combustion, because I really don't. But it's just a cute little, cute little tidbit. Flame without combustion is just a flame, but a flame with combustion is a fire. Is the idea going to meet the practice? I don't know. I guess we'll see, but it's just something interesting to think about. And this is totally my astrological take. And I haven't heard any other astrologers do this. So this is my original fucking Uranian idea. And my Uranus is domiciled on my 10th house. So, yeah, my theory is basically that the Gemini and Uranus period will see the early or prominent rise of the anti-tech revolution. So, yeah, haven't heard any other astrologers talk about it like this. This is my very original Uranian idea. And, Uranus is about to leave my ascendant. It's been transiting Taurus, which is my ascendant, 19 degrees whole sign, since 2018. I'm fucking sick of it. Let's get out of here. Get the fuck out of my ascendant, get into my second house. That's where my Saturn is. It's where my North Node is. Could I be a part of this revolution? Maybe. I hope so. It'd be fun. It'd be tea. So, yeah, astrologers, tell me what you think. So not seasoned. So not formal. Yeah. David Kaczynski, reply to my email. Love you.